I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on figure of speech. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 7, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of figure of speech. All right, so our chapter is figurative language. Sorry. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 7. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on today under the chapter of figurative language is to classify figure of speech, to interpret figure of speech, and to use personification. All right. So basically, figure of speech, right? So we're going to the first one that is about figure of speech. So figures of speech, it is words or phrases that use language in a non-literal or unusual way. And when we say it is being used in a non-literal way, so if we say it's in a non-literal way, then it means that it is not, it's almost like it's not really happening, right? So basically, they can make writing more expressive. So figures of speech, figures of speech are words or phrases that use language in a non-literal or an unusual way. And like we say, it makes writing more expressive. And that is to do with, if you say it's in a non-literal way, then it's like us saying it is a figurative language. Because you either have literal language and you have figurative language. Literal speech, figure of speech, figurative of language, right? So figurative means that it's like I'm saying something but I'm not meaning it directly or literal, right? Whereas literal is an actual literal action that I'm telling you about. So that is figures of speech. And we said figures of speech, once again, it is words or phrases that use language in a non literal or unusual way. And it is being used to express oneself. Then we have alliteration, right? So, alliteration. And alliteration is the repetition of sound at the beginning of nearby words. For example, what a lucky lady you are. So we say the alliteration is the repetition of sound at the beginning of nearby words. For example, what a lucky little lady you are. So here we are repeating, let's say, for example, the sound at the beginning of the nearby words. Lucky little lady, right? That is alliteration. The repetition of sound at the beginning of the words. All right. So we have figure of speech, right? Then we have alliteration. Then we have an allusion, right? So then we have an allusion. An allusion is a brief reference to something or someone well known. And it is often from history or it can be literature. So when it comes to allusion, it says, I'd better get home before I turn into a pumpkin. So we said that an allusion is a brief reference to something or someone well known, and it is often in history or it can be literature, right? And then we have an idiom, right? An idiom. And this is an expression that cannot be understood literally, right? It can be confusing. And when it comes to idioms, it means that we must be learned or it must be learned, right? For example, the assignment was a piece of cake, which means that the piece of cake has its own specific meaning. It means that it was easy, right? So it basically means that it was easy, but they are using an idiom, right? For example, like a piece of cake, which we know means that it is easy. And then we have a simile, right? And a simile uses like or as to compare two things that are not actually alike. So we have a simile, and a simile uses words like or as to compare two things that are not actually alike. So a simile, like we said, it uses words like or as to compare two things that are not usually alike. For example, the cat's fur was as dark as the night. All right, so we can say the metaphor can also compare to things that are not actually alike without using the word like or as. So which means that similes uses word like or as, whereas metaphors do not use that. All right. So once again, a simile is words like or as to complete two things that are not actually alike. Then we have a metaphor that also compares two things that are not actually alike, but they want to not use the word like or as, right? And then we have onomatopoeia. If you look at that word and you want to say the word, then you can say onomatopoeia. All right, so we said onomatopoeia. And onomatopoeia, it involves using a word that expresses sound. And the scrambled eggs hit the floor with a splat. All right. So we said onomatopoeia involves using a word that expresses a sound. For example, the scrambled eggs hit the floor with a splat. Right? Then we have personification. We have personification. And personification is giving human characteristics to non human things. Or we can say the trees danced in the wind. So we can say that for personification, it gives human characteristics to non-human things. So it basically gives human characteristics to non-human things. And if we look at a tree, right, we can say that the tree danced in the wind, right? So if it dances in the wind, then what does that mean? What maybe let's maybe think of a season. What season do you think we are in when trees are dancing in the wind? Is it summer season where the trees are dancing in the wind? Spring, autumn, or winter? All right. So then we have a pun, right? And a pun involves using a word or using a phrase in a humorous and funny way that suggests more than one meaning, right? So pun has more than one meaning. A great new broom is sweeping the nation. All right, so we said a pun involves using a word or phrase in a humorous, funny, jokey way that suggests more than one meaning, right? So which means that you can have different meanings based on either the phrase or the word that is being mentioned, right? And we made an example of a great new broom is sweeping the nation. So clearly, it cannot be a little thing, right? So it is basically just figurative. Then we have verbal irony. And verbal irony involves saying one thing but implying something very, very different. And we call that verbal irony. So, verbal irony involves by saying one thing but implying something different. All right. And we said that when it comes to verbal irony, it involves saying one thing but implying something different, right? So people often use verbal irony when they're being sarcastic. But each breakdown is as enjoyable as a punch to the face. All right. So when it comes to all of these figures of speeches, right? When it comes to all of these figures of speeches, We see that all of them, right, they are words or phrases that use language in a non literal or an unusual way. They can make writing more expressive, and alliteration is repetition of sounds at the beginning of nearby woods. All right. So we see that our chapter is figure of speech, grade 7, and we have so far gone over to classify figures of speech. We're going to interpret figure of speech, and then we're going to use the personification. All right. So we see that with figures of speech, we have alliteration, we have an illusion, we have a simile, we have idioms, right? It's like we're expressing different humorous things. We have onomatopoeia, and then we have sonification, pun, as well as verbal irony. All right. So we are doing a tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So now we are going to aplusstudents.ca where we are going to classify figures of speech, right? All right. So we need to say which figure of speech is being used within this text. It says, Karen gazed at the ancient plug that seemed to sleep all day and noted, You're an energetic puppy. All right. So if we look at these figures of speech, right? That gazed the ancient plug that seemed to sleep all day and just had an emergency, for example, right? All right. Then here it says which figure of speech is used in the text. Here the sledges with the bells, silver bells. All right. It says which figure of speech is used in the text. It's like a song is being sung, right? And we can say that is onomatopoeia. Yes. So we can say which figure of speech we are going to be using now in the text whenever we refer to something, right? All right. So we'll say which figure of speech is used within the text, right? It says, from forth the fatal lines or loins of these two foes, which is a pair of star-crossed lovers, take their life, right? And there they're showing to William and Juliet Shakespeare. All right. So we see that figures of speech, it is in this case where we said that from forth the fatal loins of these two foes, right? Which means that the repeated words or letters is, for example, the F, right? Which means that this is alliteration. All right. All right. So we can say that from the from forth and fatal irony or fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. All right. So we can say when it comes to the different figures of speech, right, that is being used within the text, remember each figure of speech has its own specific meaning also to it, right? And figures of speech, mostly it is words that is being used, but it's not mainly used in a literal settings. And literal means that I'm asking you like and expecting an answer type of thing, right? All right. Then we have We're going to now interpret figures of speech, right? That was basically just gazing on that same lesson for the longest of time. So now we're going to interpret figures of speech. So we're going to start with the first one, which is laughing can make people red in the face, right? And figures of speech are words or phrases that use language in a non literal or unusual way. So they also make writing non expensive. All right. So when it comes to different figures of speech, right, we see that there are different figures of speech. And figures of speech are words or phrases that use languages in a non-literal or unusual way. And they can either make your writing more expressive, right, in the way or the type of figure of speech that is being used. It can either be expressive, right? For example, we have a metaphor. So metaphor, it is a word or phrase that uses language, like we said, in a non-literal way, and it compares two things that are not actually alike. All right. So if it comes to figures of speech, we specifically made mention of a figure of speech as well as metaphors, right? When we said metaphors, it compares two things that are not actually alike when using, but without using words like or as, right? So metaphor compares two things that are not actually alike, and it's without using words like or Sam. All right, so we said figures of speech, it compares two things that are not actually alike without using the word like or as. So we say that the snow formed a blanket over the town. So now that is actually not being literal, right? It is basically like a figurative language or figurative sentence that is being made because a snow cannot basically form a blanket over town. That is not literal, but figuratively that is correct, right? So what does the metaphor in this text suggest? It says laughter is sunshine. It chases winter from the human head. All right. So snow formed a blanket over the town, and we said it is comparing two things or phrases that are that are actually alike without using like or as. So it is still a like, but they're not using like and they're not using and. All right. And what does this idiom in the text suggest? It says, if you don't mind waking up at the crack of dawn, if you even prefer it, consider a career as a baker, teacher, or an investment banker. So we can look at now the idiom. It says, what does the idiom in the text suggest? If you don't mind me waking up at the crack of dawn, consider a career as a baker, teacher, or an investment banker. All right. So we said with the idiom, right, about waking up at the crack of dawn, it basically means that you have to wake up very early every single day, right? Here it suggests, what does the metaphor in the text suggest? It says laughter is sunshine, it chases winter from the human face. All right. Let's go to our test, right? Where we can interpret figure of speech by starting by saying, what does the personification in this text suggest, right? So we're going to say what the personification within this text suggests. And a personification, it's a figure of speech that gives human qualities to non-human things, right? For example, we are going to one of our test questions. It says, what does the personification in this text suggest? The trawler plunged into the angry swells of the dark, furious sea. All right, so we say personification gives human qualities to something, right? And we say that the trawler plunged into the angry swells of the dark, furious sea. So, what does that mean? Does it mean that the trawler plunged into the angry swell? Does it mean that the sea took revenge on the trawler? Or does it mean that the sea was fierce? So, the sea took revenge on the trawler, or the sea was fierce. And if we look at the personification of the text, we can say that the sea was fierce, right? Meaning that the tide was very high, the seas were quite rough. Now, what does the verbal irony in this text suggest, right? This salsa could use a little more spice, Yoshi said as he gulped down water and wiped tears from his eyes. Does it mean that the salsa was tasteless, or does it mean that the salsa was too spicy? So the salsa was tasteless, or it was too spicy. That is the verbal irony within this text. The salsa could use a little more spice, Yoshi said as he gulped down water and wiped tears from his eyes. And especially since they're saying that he gulped down water and wiped tears from his eyes, we can say that the salsa was too spicy. All right, so spicy it is. We need to once again say what does the verbal irony in the text suggest. So according to Mr. Montoya's kids, his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer. Does it mean that the snoring is subtle or the snoring is loud? His snoring is subtle or it is loud. Right? So if we say that according to Mr. Toy's kids, his snoring is as quiet as a jackhammer, then we can actually say that his snoring is quite loud, right? Because it's almost like a figurative speech, right? So it doesn't necessarily specifically mean that he is quiet. What does the simile in the text suggest? You were as cold as ice. You are willing to sacrifice our love. The song is about someone who doesn't care or someone who is freezing. So it's either about someone who doesn't care or someone who is freezing. All right, so we can say that the simile in the text, right? You are as cold as ice, which means that this song is about someone who doesn't care because it's not directly saying that you are freezing. And that is correct. And the last one says that what does the personification in this text suggest? It says the lighthouse horn moaned and the sound traveled through the thick fog, reaching the sailors who were enveloped in the grayness. So the lighthouse horn moaned and the sound traveled through the thick fog, reaching the sailors who were enveloped in the grayness. Does it mean that the horn made a long, low sound, or the sailors were complaining because they were lost? We need to suggest or select the correct one. And if we were to choose the correct one, we would say the horn made a long, low sound. So the sailors were able to hear, for example, let's say either the warning sign, right? All right, so that's figurative language, right? And we made mention of a lot of figurative speeches within the sentence, within our lesson. That's it for our lesson for today. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.